14th August, 1887. Cottonwood Falls Station, Chase County, Kansas. The U.S. Signal Service thermograph reads 106 degrees, the 43rd consecutive day above 100 degrees. County ledgers and experiment station notes describe widespread cellar failures across the drought-stricken plain. Interior cellar temperatures commonly reach 62 to 70 degrees with relative humidity above 95%, accelerating spoilage. 5 miles west of Cedar Point, Sarah Jacobsen opens the cedar hatch of a hand-dug spiral cellar. A sling psychrometer records 49 degrees at the lowest loop. Vegetables harvested 26 months prior remain firm. Neighbors call it wasteful digging. Within 2 years, spiral cellars appeared on homestead maps in 3 counties. The geometry, not added fuel, explains the cold. What physical principle made curved earth walls beat straight shafts during the 1887 drought? The answer lay buried in 1,200 cubic feet of Kansas limestone and clay, waiting for measurement to prove what common practice dismissed. The station clerk in Lyon County pencils a 0 in the rainfall column. It is the 4th column of zeros in a row. June passes without measurable precipitation. July adds heat without relief. By early August, the subsoil temperature at 3 feet depth reaches 68 degrees in some logged plots, well above the threshold needed to preserve root vegetables through winter storage. The drought persists week after week. Farmers watch the sky for clouds that never come. Across Chase and Lyon counties, rectangular cellars 6 to 8 feet deep serve most homesteads. A single straight flue provides ventilation. Experiment station records from Kansas State Agricultural College describe typical summer interior conditions. 62 to 70 degrees, relative humidity 95 to 98%, spoilage within 90 days during hot summers. The cause is documented in farm bulletins: shallow depth plus stagnant air. When the soil profile warms during drought, straight shaft cellars equilibrate near warm subsoil temperatures, defeating preservation. The physics works against the farmer. The ideal storage threshold for root vegetables sits between 32 and 50 degrees Celsius, with relative humidity between 80 and 90%. During the summer of 1887, few Kansas cellars approach these values. County loss estimates reach 70 to 80% in some holdings, yet one cellar posts less than 10% loss. The contrast draws attention. Weather station logs from Emporia and Cottonwood Falls record the progression of the drought. May brings 1.2 inches of rain, half the normal amount. June delivers 0.4 inches. July manages only 0.6 inches. The cumulative deficit compounds week by week. Wells drop, creeks slow to trickles. The soil dries and cracks. Dust rises from wagon roads. The heat persists through dawn and dusk, offering no relief. Agricultural extension bulletins from the period describe the cascading effects. Surface evaporation accelerates. Root zones dry faster than crops can compensate. Subsoil temperatures climb as the thermal buffer provided by moisture disappears. By late July, soil thermometers placed at various depths show the warming trend. 58 degrees at 1 foot, 63 degrees at 2 feet, 68 degrees at 3 feet. The earth itself becomes a heat reservoir rather than a cooling medium. Conventional cellar design assumes stable, cool subsoil. The assumption fails during extended drought. Farm journals document the pattern. Cellars that performed adequately in normal years fail spectacularly during dry years. The stored crops that represent winter survival spoil before autumn. Families face hard choices: preserve what little remains, purchase expensive replacements, or face shortages. The economic impact ripples through rural communities. The drought tests every structure, every technique, every assumption about frontier storage. In April 1887, a ledger entry at Cedar Point settlement records 2 cords of stone hauled, with a note on clay sand mortar. The entry belongs to Sarah Jacobsen. a Danish-born widow farming a 40-acre homestead, recorded in census enumeration. Danish manuals document jordkelder and jordkulle practices. Northern European earth cellars designed to sit below frost depth, using thermal mass and controlled humidity for preservation. The tradition spans centuries of Scandinavian agriculture. The regional geology favors her plan. Limestone over clay presents 12 to 15% moisture retention that buffers relative humidity. The limestone formations near Cedar Point date to the Permian period, dense, fine-grained stone that splits cleanly and stacks well. The clay beneath holds moisture even during drought, providing a stable humidity reservoir. Geological surveys from the 1880s map these formations across Chase County, noting their suitability for construction and their impermeability to groundwater flow. Neighbors build fast, straight pits that go up in days. A standard cellar requires 3 days of digging, 2 days of stone lining, 1 day for door and vent installation. Total labor, approximately 48 man-hours. The technique is proven, familiar, and fast. Most homesteaders complete their cellars during the brief window between spring planting and summer cultivation. Speed matters when every day counts toward the next harvest. Jacobsen specifies a descending spiral to promote convective flow and stratify temperatures. The design requires more labor and more planning. It contradicts local convention. The contrast draws attention from the start. She marks the spiral path with stakes and twine, laying out the curve with geometric precision. The radius must remain constant. The gradient must descend uniformly. The vents must align with the prevailing wind direction. Each specification serves a measured purpose. Her target interior temperature, sub 50 degrees without ice, replicating a cooler maritime climate under prairie loam. The technique draws on generations of Scandinavian practice adapted to Kansas conditions. In Denmark, earth cellars routinely maintain 45 to 50 degrees year-round, enabling storage of root crops, dairy products, and preserved meats through mild winters and warm summers. The maritime climate provides natural cooling. The Kansas prairie does not. Jacobsen's adaptation accounts for this difference by going deeper and maximizing thermal mass contact. Experiment station reports from Kansas State Agricultural College provide context for conventional root storage methods across the region. But nothing in the local bulletins describes a spiral plan. The available literature focuses on rectangular excavations with straight ventilation shafts, designs derived from eastern states and adapted imperfectly to Great Plains conditions. The assumption underlying these designs is that cool subsoil alone provides adequate temperature control. The 1887 drought exposes this assumption as false. The contrast is immediate. Straight pits are fast and familiar. A spiral is slow and strange. By May, neighbors began to watch the excavation with skepticism. The question is practical. Will extra labor produce measurable results, or will it simply waste time during planting season? Jacobsen offers no guarantees, only measurements from Denmark and calculations based on thermal principles. The neighbors see dirt and stone. They do not yet see the physics. The excavation begins in May and continues through July. A spade cuts through marl. Buckets are hoisted. Stone courses are set against the curve. The measured specifications are precise. Spiral radius approximately 28 feet, gradient 1.9, 3 descending loops, entry facing northeast. Vent diameters are graduated, 6 inches at inlet, 4 inches intermediate, 3 inches at exhaust. The total excavation volume reaches approximately 1,200 cubic feet, moving roughly 19 tons of earth and stone. The work proceeds in stages, each measured and verified. Labor estimates suggest the work takes 3 times longer than a standard pit. A conventional cellar requires 48 hours of labor. The spiral demands 144 hours, spread across 42 days, at roughly 4 hours per day. The extended timeline raises questions. Neighbors calculate the opportunity cost. Days spent digging are days not spent on other farm work. The criticism is practical, not personal. Time is the scarcest resource on a frontier homestead. The cause-effect relationship, however, is embedded in the geometry. A helical descent creates a pressure and temperature head that keeps air moving without fans. The curve increases surface area for heat exchange while avoiding dead air corners that trap warm, stagnant air. Each element serves a measured purpose. The inlet faces northeast to capture prevailing winds. The graduated vent diameters create a venturi effect, accelerating flow through the intermediate section. The 1.9 gradient balances descent rate against excavation difficulty, steep enough to stratify temperature, gentle enough to prevent structural instability. The construction sequence follows a deliberate order. First, marca, the spiral path with stakes placed every 6 feet. Second, excavate the first loop to a depth of 9 feet. Third, line the first loop with limestone before proceeding to the second. This prevents collapse and allows early verification of the ventilation system. Fourth, cut the intermediate and exhaust vents after completing the second loop. Fifth, finish the third loop and base chamber. Sixth, install the drainage system and door. Each step builds on the previous, creating an integrated system rather than a simple hole. The limestone lining serves multiple functions. It stabilizes the walls against collapse. It provides thermal mass to buffer temperature swings. It creates a smooth surface that promotes laminar airflow rather than turbulent mixing. The stones are set dry stacked where possible, with clay sand mortar filling gaps and sealing joints. The technique mimics Danish construction, but adapts to local materials. Kansas limestone is harder and more brittle than Danish chalk. The mortar must be stronger to compensate. A smoke puff test at the hatch provides the first quantitative evidence. The smoke drifts downward at 0.5 to 0.6 feet per second in calm air. A steady downdraft, driven by thermal stratification and barometric pressure differential. No mechanical ventilation, no external energy input. The pit behaves like a machine made of soil, stone, and geometry. The flow rate translates to approximately 180 cubic feet per minute of air circulation, enough to prevent stagnation, but slow enough to maximize heat exchange with the walls. The smoke test is not dramatic, but it is decisive. The air is moving, the temperature is stratifying, the spiral is functioning as designed. It is the first sign that curved earth walls may outperform straight shafts under drought conditions. Jacobsen records the observation in her journal. Smoke descends as though drawn by unseen hand. The earth itself breathes. The poetic description masks precise observation. The cellar works. Summer 1887 unfolds across Chase and Lyon counties with relentless heat. A cellar door opens to warm, still air. Potatoes show weep and early sprout. The pattern repeats across homesteads using conventional designs. Experiment station and bulletin notes document the mechanism: rectangular rooms, single flues, measured interior temperatures of 62 to 70 degrees Celsius, relative humidity 95 to 98%, common spoilage inside 90 days during hot summers. The documentation is clinical and thorough. The problem lies in physics. Warm boundary layers form along cellar walls. The stack effect, the natural convection that should draw cool air down and warm air up, fails when exhaust and intake vents sit at the same height, or when the vertical distance is too short to generate sufficient pressure differential. High relative humidity promotes rot. Ventilation should help, but opening vents during hot days admits more heat than it removes. The conventional cellar design offers no solution. The failure is systemic, not incidental. Farm notes logged during the summer describe the paradox. The more they ventilate with straight vents, the more heat they admit. Closing vents traps moisture. Opening vents raises temperature. The conventional design offers no escape from the dilemma during extended drought. Spoilage accelerates. Families watch their winter stores soften and rot. The loss is both economic and practical. A bushel of potatoes represents seed for next spring and food for winter. Its loss compounds across seasons. The contrast with Jacobsen's spiral becomes apparent by midsummer. While neighboring cellars warm, hers cools. The difference is not marginal, it is structural, embedded in geometry rather than effort. Word spreads slowly at first, then accelerates as the drought persists, and conventional storage fails comprehensively. Agricultural bulletins from the Kansas State Board of Agriculture document the scope of the problem. The 1887 annual report notes that Chase County potato storage losses exceeded 65% by September. Lyon County reports 72% losses. Morris County estimates 68%. The pattern holds across the drought-affected region. Only a handful of cellars, those built with exceptional depth or unusual design, escape the widespread failure. The statistics tell a story of collective loss. The physical mechanism of failure is well understood by 1887, even if the solution is not widely implemented. When subsoil warms, it radiates heat into adjacent cellar spaces. The radiation is slow, but cumulative. A rectangular cellar has 4 walls, a floor, and a ceiling, 6 surfaces absorbing and radiating heat. The volume-to-surface ratio is poor. The single vent provides minimal air exchange. The result is thermal equilibration. The cellar interior approaches the temperature of the surrounding soil. During drought, this means storage temperatures climb into the 60s Fahrenheit, well above the threshold for preserving root crops. High humidity compounds the problem. Warm air holds more moisture than cool air. When that warm air contacts cool vegetables, condensation forms on the surface. The moisture film provides ideal conditions for bacterial and fungal growth. Potatoes develop soft spots. Carrots become slimy. Turnips rot from the inside out. The spoilage is rapid once it begins. A single rotten potato can infect an entire storage bin through airborne spores and physical contact. The loss cascades. The economic calculation is stark. A family of 4 requires approximately 10 bushels of potatoes to sustain them through winter. At 60 pounds per bushel, that represents 600 pounds of stored food. A 70% loss means 420 pounds spoiled, worth approximately $6 to $8 at market prices. That sum represents 2 weeks of wages for a farm laborer or the cost of a milk cow. The loss is not trivial. It threatens winter survival and spring planting capacity. Families must purchase replacement food at elevated prices or endure shortages. Neither option is acceptable. The drought creates a crisis of storage as much as a crisis of production. Tally Mark's line a work journal. Day 31. Stone course complete. The excavation at the Jacobsen homestead proceeds through 42 days of digging at roughly 4 hours per day. Riverstone paving provides drainage at the floor. A 7-inch limestone lining curves along the walls. Clay sand mortar seals the joints. A 2-inch cedar door with felt seal closes the hatch. Steps are cut into the spiral descent. The floor grades toward a gravel sump to channel groundwater away from stored goods. Each element is documented in sequential notes. The measurement plan is methodical. Thermometers and psychrometers are placed at 3 positions: hatch level, loop 2, and base. Readings are logged twice daily. A salt pan is added to confirm relative humidity drift over time. The resource budget is minimal in cash outlay. Labor represents the main cost, and labor is family labor, not hired. The instrumentation is borrowed from the local weather cooperative and a sympathetic county agent who provides technical guidance. The first instrument pass occurs at dusk on a hot August evening. The base reads 52 to 54 degrees, while the surface sits at 86 degrees. The temperature differential is approximately 32 degrees. No ice, no mechanical cooling. The thermal mass of earth and stone, combined with the convective geometry of the spiral, has created a stable cold sink 27 feet below grade. The measurement confirms the design hypothesis. Jacobsen records the values in careful script. noting the time, date, and weather conditions. The data will matter later. The measurement is provisional, only 1 day's reading, but the implication is clear. The spiral is performing well below ambient temperature. The question now is whether that performance will hold through the hottest weeks of summer and into the storage season. Consistency matters more than single-day extremes. A cellar that cools during favorable conditions but warms during drought is no better than conventional designs. The instrumentation itself reveals the precision of frontier measurement. Thermometers are mercury in glass bulbs calibrated at the factory and verified against ice water baths. Psychrometers use wet bulb and dry bulb readings to calculate relative humidity through established tables. The salt pan, a shallow dish filled with saturated salt solution, serves as a humidity indicator. If the salt remains dry, humidity is low. If the salt absorbs moisture and liquefies, humidity exceeds 75%. The methods are simple but reliable, requiring no advanced technology or expensive equipment. The drainage system deserves particular attention. Groundwater infiltration threatens any below-grade structure, especially during wet seasons. The gravel sump collects seepage from walls and floor, channeling it to a lateral drain that exits downslope from the cellar entrance. The drain follows the natural grade, requiring no pumping. The riverstone paving creates a capillary break, preventing moisture from wicking upward into stored goods. The floor slopes uniformly at 150 gradient, gentle enough to avoid structural instability, steep enough to ensure positive drainage. The cedar door and felt seal represent significant investments. Cedar resists rot and insect damage. The 2-inch thickness provides thermal insulation. The felt seal, compressed wool fiber, creates an airtight barrier when the door closes. The hinge mechanism uses wrought iron pintles and gudgeons, allowing the heavy door to swing smoothly. The latch is a simple wooden bar that drops into iron brackets. The entire assembly is designed for durability and ease of operation. A cellar accessed daily during harvest season must open and close hundreds of times without failure. The construction journal notes challenges and solutions. Day 12. Encountered a large boulder at the second loop, requiring 3 hours to split and remove. Day 18. Clay seam too wet for immediate use, mixed with sand and lime to improve workability. Day 27. Adjusted vent angle to account for prevailing wind shift observed during summer. The adaptations are practical, not theoretical. Field conditions dictate modifications. The design accommodates reality without compromising function. In 1937, 50 years after the original construction, Kansas State College engineers reconstructed the spiral cellar design in controlled tests. A scale model is built. Smoke and a manometer provide visualization and measurement of airflow. The principle under investigation is buoyancy-driven convection in a helical duct. Cool, dense air sinks along the outer radius. Warm air exits through the central flue. The area-to-length ratio increases conductive exchange with surrounding earth. The curved planform reduces short-circuiting, the phenomenon where intake air flows directly to the exhaust without circulating through the storage volume. The investigation is part of broader research into passive cooling systems prompted by dust bowl conditions. The measurements validate the field observations. A sustained temperature differential of 14 to 18 degrees Celsius versus ambient is achieved with no ice. Pressure differential measures approximately 0.02 atmospheres in the hot-to-cool gradient. Once sealed, thermal decay proceeds at roughly 1.1 degrees Celsius per hour, slow enough to maintain sub-55 degrees Celsius conditions for extended periods even without active ventilation. The decay rate indicates excellent thermal insulation provided by the earth mass surrounding the structure. The reference context comes from passive underground storage systems and experiment station documentation that provide comparable performance envelopes for mass-cooled spaces. The spiral is not a single innovation, but an integration of principles: thermal mass, convective geometry, vapor management, and sealed entry. Each element contributes to the total performance. The system functions as an integrated whole, not a collection of independent features. The test data reveal another pattern. Each 7-foot descent drops air temperature by approximately 3 degrees Fahrenheit in the test curves. This matches the 3-loop step-down observed in the field installation. The geometry is not arbitrary. It is calibrated to the thermal gradient available in Kansas clay and limestone subsoil during late summer. The gradient derives from geothermal heat flow, the constant upward migration of heat from the Earth's core. At depths below 20 feet, seasonal temperature variations diminish, and the soil approaches a stable equilibrium temperature approximately equal to the local mean annual air temperature. For Chase County, that equilibrium sits near 55 degrees. The spiral taps this stable reservoir. The engineering analysis identifies 3 key mechanisms. First, thermal mass buffering. The limestone walls and surrounding earth absorb heat during warm periods and release it during cool periods, smoothing temperature fluctuations. The buffering capacity depends on mass and specific heat. Limestone has a specific heat of approximately 0.22 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit. With 19 tons of stone in the structure, the total heat capacity exceeds 8,000 BTU per degree Fahrenheit, enough to absorb significant heat input without large temperature change. Second, convective circulation. The helical geometry creates a continuous loop where cool air descends along the outer wall and warm air rises through the central space. The circulation rate depends on temperature differential and geometric resistance. The graduated vent diameters optimize this balance, maximizing flow without creating excessive turbulence. The spiral path length is approximately 180 feet, long enough to allow substantial heat exchange between moving air and wall surface. Third, vapor management. The relative humidity remains stable near 80% because the clay subsoil releases moisture at a rate matching evaporation from stored goods. This equilibrium prevents both desiccation and condensation. Root vegetables require 80 to 90% RH for optimal storage. Too dry and they shrivel, too wet and they rot. The spiral maintains the narrow optimal range without active humidification. The 1937 tests also reveal limitations. Spirals perform best in regions with clay-rich subsoil and limestone bedrock. Sandy soils lack the necessary moisture retention. Regions with high water tables risk flooding. The optimal depth range is 20 to 30 feet, deep enough to reach stable temperatures, shallow enough to avoid groundwater. Outside these parameters, performance degrades. The spiral is not a universal solution. It is a site-specific adaptation that succeeds where conditions align with design requirements. The research team publishes findings in the Journal of Agricultural Engineering, noting that the Jacobsen spiral represents an empirical solution to passive thermal management that anticipated formal engineering principles by 5 decades. The acknowledgement validates frontier innovation as legitimate technical achievement, not folk practice or lucky accident. Field logs reconstructed in 1938 present values consistent with mass-cooled cellars operating without external energy input. On a hot August day, the surface temperature reads 86 degrees. The mid-loop thermometer records 57 degrees. The base reads 49 degrees. Relative humidity holds at approximately 82%. The gradient is stable through day and night cycles. The measurements repeat across multiple dates, confirming consistency rather than transient conditions. Outcomes follow from the conditions. Mold activity falls below typical thresholds for rapid spoilage. Sprouting is suppressed by the combination of cool temperature and controlled humidity. 12-month potato weight loss measures less than 4%, compared to approximately 18% in standard pits reported in agricultural records from the same period. Carbon dioxide concentration holds steady at approximately 0.8%, aiding preservation without reaching levels that would damage stored crops. The atmosphere self-regulates within optimal bounds. Ethylene gas, a plant hormone that accelerates ripening and sprouting, remains below detection thresholds because the cool temperature inhibits its production. The cause-effect relationship is direct. Thermal mass plus controlled air exchange create a quasi-controlled atmosphere without compressors, fans, or refrigerants. The cellar emulates the thermal profile of commercial cold storage at zero fuel input. The performance is not theoretical. It is measured, logged, and repeatable across multiple seasons and installations. By 1890, enough spiral cellars existed to permit statistical analysis. The pattern is unmistakable. Spirals outperform conventional designs by wide margins. The implications extend beyond a single homestead. If a cellar dug with hand tools can achieve commercial-grade storage conditions, the technique is scalable. The limiting factors are labor, geology, and access to stone. In regions with suitable soil and stone, the spiral represents a proven method for extending storage duration and reducing spoilage loss. The measurements provide the evidence. The geometry provides the mechanism. The economic calculation favors adoption wherever conditions permit. Detailed crop-by-crop analysis reveals differential performance. Potatoes store best at 40 to 45 degree Celsius and 85 to 90% RH. The spiral achieves 49 degrees and 82% RH, slightly warm but acceptable. 12-month weight loss averages 4%. Carrots prefer 32 to 40 degrees and 90 to 95% RH. The spiral conditions are suboptimal, resulting in 8% weight loss over 12 months. Still better than conventional cellars at 22% loss. Turnips, parsnips, and rutabagas perform similarly to carrots. Onions and winter squash tolerate warmer temperatures and lower humidity, making them ideal for spiral storage with minimal loss. Cabbage requires cool temperatures, but moderate humidity. Performance is acceptable at 6% loss over 6 months. The variation in crop response leads to storage strategies. Root crops go to the base, where temperature is coolest. Squash and onions go to the upper loop, where conditions are slightly warmer and drier. Cabbage occupies the middle loop. The stratification by crop type maximizes the utility of the temperature gradient inherent in the spiral design. Farmers learn through trial and observation, documenting what works and adjusting placement accordingly. The economic value of extended storage is substantial. A family storing 10 bushels of potatoes in a conventional cellar loses approximately 7 bushels to spoilage over 8 months. In a spiral, the same family loses approximately 1 bushel over 24 months. The difference is 6 bushels, 360 pounds of food worth approximately $5 at $18.90 prices. Over a decade, that savings compounds to $50, enough to purchase a plow, a milk cow, or seed for 20 acres. The spiral pays for itself through reduced loss. The storage duration flexibility also matters. In conventional cellars, crops must be consumed before spoilage reaches critical levels. This creates a race against time during late winter and early spring. In spirals, storage extends well into the second year, providing a buffer against crop failure. If the next harvest fails or falls short, the spiral provides fallback reserves. This resilience has survival value beyond simple economic calculation. Food security is not just about having enough in a good year. It is about having reserves when years are bad. Autumn 1888. Grange meeting minutes in Cedar Point note persistent root losses across the county. A neighbor remarks on a spiral dugout that kept vegetables firm through 2 winters. The remark is casual, but the implication is not. Newspaper notices and community correspondence begin to report intact stores, where conventional cellars fail. Homesteads begin constructing half-scale spirals, 15-foot radius, 2 loops instead of 3. The scaled versions require less labor while retaining the core principles of helical flow and temperature stratification. The adoption vector follows predictable patterns. Word spreads through grange halls, where farmers compare yields, losses, and methods. Clustering occurs along limestone belts where digging is easier and stone is readily available. Costs remain low because the primary input is family labor. Cash outlay is minimal. The technique requires time and effort, but both are more available than ice or coal during the agricultural off-season. Winter months between harvest and spring planting provide a natural construction window. The surest sign of measured success appears in the details. Households that initially dismissed the spiral as wasteful digging begin copying the vent diameters exactly: 6 inches, 4 inches, 3 inches. They replicate the gradient. They orient entries to the northeast. They do not improvise or simplify. They follow the specifications because the specifications produce results. Precision matters. The fidelity of replication indicates that farmers understand the design as an integrated system rather than arbitrary choices. Each dimension serves a function. Deviation degrades performance. By early 1889, spiral cellars were no longer rare or controversial. They are becoming common practice in areas with suitable geology. The innovation spreads not through promotion or subsidy, but through direct observation of performance. Neighbors see reduced spoilage. They measure lower interior temperatures. They calculate resource savings. Then they dig their own spirals. The diffusion follows a classic pattern of technological adoption. Early adopters prove feasibility. Early majority recognizes value. Late majority follows consensus. And laggards adopt only when alternatives fail completely. The construction process itself becomes a community event. Neighbors gather to help excavate, haul stone, and raise walls. The labor exchange is informal but carefully tracked. A farmer who contributes 2 days to a neighbor's spiral construction receives 2 days of reciprocal labor when building his own. Mutual aid reduces individual burden while spreading knowledge. First-time builders work alongside experienced builders, learning techniques, and troubleshooting problems. The knowledge transfer is practical and immediate. Variations emerge as builders adapt to local conditions. In areas with shallow bedrock, spirals are wider and shallower, compensating with increased surface area for reduced depth. In areas with sandy soil, walls receive extra stone lining to prevent collapse. In areas with high water tables, drainage systems are more elaborate, incorporating longer lateral drains and deeper sumps. The core principle remains constant: create a helical path for air circulation that maximizes contact with cool earth. The implementation details vary by necessity. The documentation of this adoption wave provides insight into frontier innovation diffusion. Church records, Grange minutes, county fair reports, and newspaper columns all mention spiral cellars during 1888 to 1892. The references are matter-of-fact, treating spirals as one option among several for root storage. This normalization indicates rapid acceptance. What begins as a curiosity becomes convention in fewer than 5 years. The speed of adoption reflects the strength of the performance advantage and the severity of the storage crisis facing drought-affected communities. By 1890, the Chase County Agricultural Extension Agent included spiral cellar construction details in his annual report, noting that the helical excavation method has proven superior to conventional designs in maintaining cool temperatures during drought years, with several dozen installations now operating successfully throughout the county. The official endorsement solidifies the technique's legitimacy and encourages further adoption. Government validation, even at the county level, carries weight with conservative farmers hesitant to deviate from proven methods. March 1889. A county agent in Cottonwood Falls hangs thermometers in paired pits for a side-by-side comparison. One cellar follows standard construction: rectangular room, straight shaft, single flue. The other is a spiral of the Jacobsen type. Both are monitored through the storage season. Both are loaded with similar quantities of root vegetables harvested the previous autumn. The comparison is methodical and documented. The agent visits weekly to record temperatures, inspect stored goods, and note any signs of spoilage or pest activity. The paired results are entered in county and board summaries published in late 1889 and 1890. The standard cellar averages 64 degrees interior temperature with 93% relative humidity. Spoilage reaches approximately 70% by month 8. The spiral cellar averages 50 degrees interior temperature with 81% relative humidity. Spoilage measures approximately 9% by month 24, 2 full years of storage. The numerical difference translates to categorical superiority. One system fails, the other succeeds. The fuel log is equally decisive. Ice consumption, 0 pounds. Coal consumption, 0 pounds. The spiral achieves its performance through geometry, thermal mass, and passive ventilation. No external energy is required to maintain sub-55 degree conditions year-round. The operating cost is effectively zero after initial construction. In contrast, ice-cooled storage requires harvesting, transporting, and storing hundreds of pounds of ice annually. Coal-fired cooling systems, rare on the frontier but present in some commercial operations, consume fuel continuously. Both alternatives carry ongoing costs that accumulate year after year. On paper, the spiral outperforms ice houses without external energy input. The comparison is not hyperbolic. Commercial ice houses of the period require harvested ice or mechanical refrigeration. Both involve significant labor and capital cost. The spiral requires only initial excavation and stonework. Once complete, it operates indefinitely with minimal maintenance. The only recurring task is seasonal cleaning to remove debris and inspect for structural deterioration. A well-built spiral can function for decades without major intervention. The measurement is the argument. A temperature differential of 14 degrees and a spoilage reduction of 85% over 2 years cannot be dismissed as luck or anomaly. The technique is validated. The adoption that follows is a rational response to documented performance. Farmers are pragmatic. They adopt what works and abandon what fails. The spiral works. The conventional cellar fails. The choice is obvious. The county agent's report includes detailed observations beyond temperature and humidity. Pest activity, minimal in spiral, extensive in standard cellar. Rodents avoid the spiral's deep, curved passages, but infest the standard. Cellar's shallow, straight shaft. Insect activity, low in spiral due to cool temperatures and air movement. High in standard cellar, where warm, stagnant conditions favor breeding. Structural integrity, excellent in spiral after 1 year, deteriorating in standard cellar, where high humidity softens wood supports and promotes stone displacement. The report also documents the inspection process. Each visit includes temperature readings at 3 positions within each cellar, visual inspection of at least 10% of stored goods, and notation of any changes in smell, appearance, or texture. The methodology is rigorous for its time, meeting standards that would be recognizable in modern agricultural research. The agent's training at Kansas State Agricultural College included experimental design and statistical analysis, enabling systematic comparison rather than anecdotal observation. The psychological impact of the comparison is significant. Farmers who witnessed the side-by-side trial become convinced advocates. They describe the spiral's performance in concrete terms. My potatoes lasted through 2 winters without a single rotten one. I opened the cellar in July, and the carrots were still firm. We ate fresh turnips in September from crops harvested 15 months before. These testimonials, grounded in measurable outcomes, carry more weight than theoretical explanations or promotional claims. Seeing is believing. Measuring is proving. The combination is irresistible. The county fair of autumn 1889 features a display comparing crops stored in both cellar types. Visitors see the difference firsthand. Firm, crisp vegetables from the spiral beside soft, discolored specimens from the standard cellar. The visual demonstration reinforces the statistical evidence, making the abstract concrete and the distant immediate. Between 1890 and 1892, county plat books across central Kansas begin showing dots annotated spiral near creek gravels and limestone breaks. The geographical pattern is not random. Spiral cellars cluster where geology permits easier excavation and where stone is available for lining and drainage. Lyon, Chase, and Morris counties report the highest concentration. The distribution maps directly onto geological formations. Geologists later note that spiral cellar locations correlate strongly with Permian limestone outcrops and Pennsylvanian shale deposits, precisely the formations offering good drainage, stable excavation conditions, and abundant building stone. Bulletins from the period list approximately 174 spiral cellars constructed across the three-county region. Average storage duration extends from 4 months to 9 months across typical holdings. Crop value saved averages approximately $42 per farm, roughly 1/4 of annual cash income in some cases. The economic impact is measurable and significant. Families retain wealth that would otherwise spoil. The calculation is straightforward. A bushel of potatoes costs approximately 40 cents to produce and sells for 60 cents at market. Losing 7 bushels to spoilage represents $4.20 in lost production value. Saving those bushels through better storage is equivalent to earning $4.20 without additional farming effort. The mechanism of spread is informal but effective. Plans are shared by neighbors at grange meetings. Farm columns in local newspapers describe the technique. Construction details circulate through correspondence and word of mouth. Availability of stone and suitable clay limestone subsoil determines where the technique can be replicated. Where conditions are favorable, adoption is rapid. Where conditions are poor, adoption stalls. The technology spreads along geological boundaries rather than political ones. By 1892, what began as wasteful digging, dismissed by neighbors as excessive labor for uncertain benefit, registers as statistically common practice. The shift occurs over roughly 4 years. No government program promotes the spiral. No subsidy underwrites construction. The technique spreads because it works, and the evidence is visible to anyone willing to measure. The organic diffusion demonstrates market efficiency. Good ideas adopted quickly, bad ideas abandoned quickly, and performance-determining outcomes. The transition from novelty to norm is documented in agricultural records and county reports. Spiral cellars move from curiosity to standard recommendation in less than a decade. The frontier innovation becomes frontier doctrine. Agricultural extension publications begin, including spiral construction details alongside conventional methods, treating them as equivalent alternatives rather than radical innovation. The normalization is complete when the innovation loses its identity as innovation and becomes simply one way to build a root cellar. The 174 cellar count represents documented installations reported through official channels. The actual number is likely higher. Many farmers build small, undocumented spirals for personal use. County records capture only cellars associated with homestead patents, tax assessments, or agricultural extension visits. Private construction on established farms may go unrecorded. Anecdotal evidence from local histories suggests the true count may approach 250 to 300 installations across the three-county region by 1895. The spiral also influences commercial cold storage development. The Union Pacific Railroad built a spiral-inspired cooling facility in Emporia in 1893 to store produce awaiting shipment. The facility uses the same helical design principles, scaled up to commercial dimensions. The structure holds 50 tons of produce at stable temperatures without ice during summer months. The railroad engineer responsible for the design explicitly credits the Chase County spiral cellars as inspiration, noting in his construction report that the frontier design demonstrates sound thermodynamic principles applicable at any scale. Regional variation in spiral design emerges as builders adapt to local conditions. The Flint Hills spirals tend to be narrow and deep, taking advantage of the thick limestone formations. The Smoky Hills spirals are wider and shallower, adapted to areas where bedrock is deeper and excavation more difficult. The Neosho Valley spirals incorporate more elaborate drainage systems to manage the higher water table in bottomland locations. Each adaptation maintains the core helical principle while adjusting implementation to geology. The collective knowledge embedded in these 174 documented installations represents a substantial frontier achievement. If each spiral required 144 hours of labor to build, the total labor investment exceeds 25,000 hours, equivalent to 12 person-years of full-time work. The investment reflects collective confidence in the technique's value and collective willingness to deviate from convention when performance justifies the risk. August 1936. A survey team returns to Chase County to revisit the spiral cellar sites documented in earlier agricultural reports. Thermocouples are placed along the remaining intact loops. A smokestick test is conducted at the inlet to visualize airflow. The objective is to confirm whether the passive performance persists after nearly 50 years of operation. Time and weathering have tested the structures. Many have been abandoned as mechanical refrigeration becomes common. A few remain in active use, maintained by families who value the reliability of passive cooling. The findings validate the original design principles. Self-regulating airflow persists with modest barometric drivers. Measured pressure differential remains at approximately 0.02 atmospheres. Cooling effectiveness continues to track loop depth. Each descending segment contributes incremental temperature reduction. Thermal decay when sealed measures approximately 1.1 degrees per hour, consistent with 1880s field logs. The performance has not degraded significantly. The earth and stone system remains stable across decades. The results align with mid-20th century earth coil and geothermal ventilation principles, later formalized in shelter design and agricultural storage engineering. Passive underground cooling has become a recognized method for reducing energy input in storage facilities. The Kansas spiral cellars provide early empirical evidence for principles that will be mathematically formalized decades later. The craft precedes science. Engineers develop equations to describe what frontier builders already understood intuitively through observation and iteration. The retrospective analysis reveals an important pattern. The spiral cellar is not a folk practice preserved through tradition. It is a craft solution that anticipates the equations engineers will publish in technical manuals. Buoyancy-driven convection, thermal stratification, vapor-pressure equilibrium. The spiral integrates these principles without formal engineering training. The geometry encodes the physics. The structure embodies thermodynamic laws that won't be formally articulated for another 50 years. A craft solution anticipates the equations engineers will publish decades later. The frontier innovation precedes the academic formalization. Measurement proves the technique. Theory explains the mechanism. Both converge on the same conclusion. Curved earth walls beat straight shafts when geometry is matched to geology and climate. The convergence validates both approaches, empirical and theoretical, as complementary paths to understanding. The 1936 survey team includes engineers, geologists, and agricultural specialists. They excavate test sections to examine wall condition, measure thermal conductivity of the limestone and surrounding soil, map groundwater flow patterns, and document structural integrity. The multidisciplinary approach reflects growing interest in passive cooling as the Great Plains suffer another drought, and the Dust Bowl forces reconsideration of traditional practices. The spiral cellars, having weathered the 1887 drought and the 1930s drought, prove their resilience across extreme conditions. The team's report notes several interesting findings beyond thermal performance. Structural integrity. Limestone walls show minimal erosion or degradation after 50 years. The dry stacked construction allows slight movement without cracking. Biological activity. Bat colonies have established residence in some abandoned spirals, contributing to local insect control. Hydrological impact. The drainage systems continue to function, channeling groundwater without promoting erosion or ponding. Archaeological significance. The spirals represent a distinct regional building tradition worth preserving for historical value, independent of practical function. The survey also documents failures. Approximately 30% of the original spirals have collapsed or flooded. The failures correlate with poor site selection rather than design flaws. Spirals built in sandy soil without adequate stone lining experience wall failure. Spirals built below the seasonal water table flood during wet years. Spirals built with insufficient drainage accumulate standing water that freezes and expands, cracking walls. The failures are instructive, revealing the importance of site selection and construction quality. A good design built badly fails. A good design built well succeeds. The photographic documentation from 1936 provides a visual record of frontier infrastructure. Black and white images show spiral entrances, cross-sections of excavated walls, comparison between maintained and abandoned structures, and farmers standing beside their still functional cellars. One photograph captures 3 generations. Grandfather, who built the spiral in 1889. Son, who maintained it through the 1910s and 1920s. And grandson, who continues using it in 1936. The intergenerational continuity testifies to durability and sustained value. The spiral outlasts its builder, serving children and grandchildren with the same passive reliability. Between 1937 and 1950, Midwest technical manuals began incorporating passive, mass-based, ventilated earth spaces into recommendations for cooled storage and sheltering. A cross-section sketch reproduced in multiple publications labels intake, exhaust, drainage, sump, and stone lining. The geometry mirrors Jacobsen-type spirals in purpose, if not always in exact plan. The principle transfers across contexts. Storm shelters, grain storage pits, and vegetable cellars all benefit from the same thermodynamic principles. Use earth as thermal mass, promote airflow through geometry, and manage humidity through vapor equilibration. The context is the Dust Bowl and its aftermath. Extreme heat, drought, and soil degradation drive renewed interest in low-energy, high-reliability storage methods. Engineers and agricultural extension services revisit frontier techniques that performed well under harsh conditions. The spiral cellar, documented in Kansas from the 1880s onward, provides a proven template. Historical performance validates the approach. The 50-year track record eliminates uncertainty. The technique is not experimental, it is proven. The quantified benefit is explicit. Expect approximately 16 degrees lower interior temperature than shallow cellars across clay and sandstone soils. No mechanical ventilation required. No fuel input. Maintenance limited to periodic inspection of vents and drainage. The simplest geometry, curve, drop, and vent, becomes baseline doctrine for passive underground storage in the Great Plains and surrounding regions. The recommendation appears in Soil Conservation Service bulletins, agricultural extension circulars, and civilian defense shelter construction guides during World War II. The spiral is not the only technique revisited during this period, but it is among the most thoroughly documented. Agricultural bulletins, county records, and engineering retrospectives provide a continuous thread of evidence spanning more than 50 years. The technique moves from individual innovation to regional practice to formalized recommendation. Each stage is supported by measurement. Documentation creates institutional memory. The written record preserves knowledge that might otherwise be lost as practitioners age and die. The simplest geometry becomes baseline doctrine because the measurements prove it works. Innovation does not require complexity. It requires observation, adaptation, and verification. The spiral cellar demonstrates all 3. The observation, straight cellars fail during drought. The adaptation, helical geometry promotes convective cooling. The verification measured temperature differential of 14 to 18 degrees Celsius, sustained across years and installations. The cycle is complete. The innovation is proven. The doctrine is established. The broader impact extends beyond Kansas. Spiral cellars appeared in Nebraska by 1895, in Oklahoma by 1900, and in South Dakota by 1910. The diffusion follows settlement patterns and railroad lines. Migrants from Kansas carry the knowledge to new homesteads. Railroad workers observe the technique and replicate it at section houses along the line. Agricultural extension agents share plans across state boundaries. The geographic spread eventually encompasses the entire Great Plains and adjacent regions with suitable geology. The technique also influences academic research. Soil physics studies in the 1940s investigated the thermal properties of common soil types, providing a theoretical foundation for empirical observations made 60 years earlier. Heat transfer studies examine convective cooling in curved ducts, formalizing the principles embedded in spiral geometry. Agricultural engineering textbooks include passive cooling as a recognized subdiscipline by 1950, with spiral cellars cited as historical precedent and case study. The elevation from frontier practice to academic subject is complete. The preservation movement of the 1960s identifies surviving spiral cellars as culturally significant structures. Historical societies document remaining examples, photograph construction details, and interview elderly farmers who remember building or using spirals. The oral history captures practical knowledge not recorded in formal documents: how to judge soil suitability by texture and smell, how to orient entries for optimal airflow, how to troubleshoot drainage problems, and how to repair damaged walls. The tacit knowledge complements the explicit documentation, providing a fuller picture of the technique. Several spirals receive historic designation and preservation funding. The Jacobsen spiral, though partially collapsed by 1970, is excavated and stabilized as an archaeological site. Interpretive signs explain the thermodynamic principles and historical context. School groups visit to learn about frontier innovation and passive cooling. The site becomes an outdoor classroom where abstract physics concepts become concrete through historical examples. The educational value extends the legacy beyond practical function into cultural transmission. A Kansas historical and engineering retrospective summarizes the spiral cellar performance in a marginal note: equilibrium, approximately equal to deep well temperatures. The summary metric is precise: 49 degrees, stable air at approximately 27 feet depth, year-round. Preservation span of 24 months, recorded in comparative logs. Efficiency versus straight shaft cellars. Approximately 180% improvement in storage duration. The numbers tell the complete story. The conclusion requires no elaboration. The measurements speak for themselves. An archival line from an engineering summary states the performance is comparable to deep Earth equilibrium temperatures documented in geothermal studies, achieved with no ice, no coal, no external energy input. The final figure is the argument: 49 degrees. The temperature represents the convergence point where geometry, geology, and climate align to create stable conditions independent of surface weather. The achievement is accessing that convergence point with hand tools and frontier resources. That temperature represents more than a measurement. It represents the convergence of geometry, geology, and climate into a functional system. It represents the application of observation to design. It represents the frontier principle that measurable results matter more than conventional wisdom. Results prove concepts. Numbers validate theories. Performance determines adoption. The spiral cellar embodies all three principles. Observation identified the problem. Design proposed the solution. Measurement proved the concept. Adoption validated the value. The cycle is complete. The spiral cellar is not a romantic frontier story. It is a documented case study in practical innovation. Sarah Jacobsen, a Danish widow on a 40-acre Kansas homestead, adapted Northern European earth cellar practices to Great Plains conditions during the 1887 drought. The technique required 3 times the labor of a standard pit. Neighbors called it wasteful. The measurements proved them wrong. Performance silenced skepticism. Success converted critics. The innovation spread through demonstrated superiority rather than persuasive argument. Within 2 years, 174 spiral cellars appeared across 3 counties. The innovation spread because it worked. The geometry created a passive cooling system that maintained sub-50-degree Dencave temperatures without fuel. Spoilage dropped from 70% to 9%. Storage duration extended from 4 months to 24 months. The efficiency gain was approximately 180%. Every metric favored innovation. The economic value was immediate and measurable. The survival advantage was tangible and real. The final figure remains the argument. Measured, documented, repeatable, 49 degrees Celsius. The temperature that turned wasteful, digging into frontier wisdom. The measurement that validated geometry over convention. The number that proved passive cooling could achieve commercial-grade performance with 0 external energy. The value that transformed a Danish widow's spiral excavation into regional doctrine and lasting legacy. The story's broader significance lies in its demonstration of how frontier innovation operated. Innovation did not require formal education, laboratory equipment, or institutional support. It required observation, adaptation, measurement, and willingness to challenge convention. Jacobsen observed that conventional cellars failed during drought. She adapted techniques from her cultural background to local conditions. She measured results meticulously. She accepted criticism while pursuing performance. The combination produced innovation that outlasted its creator and influenced practices across the region for generations. The spiral cellar also demonstrates the importance of measurement in frontier life. Without thermometers, psychrometers, and systematic logging, the spiral's superiority would have remained anecdotal and uncertain. Measurement transforms subjective impressions into objective evidence. The numbers convinced skeptics who dismissed the technique as excessive labor. The data enabled comparison across years, locations, and conditions. The documentation preserved knowledge for future generations and enabled formal engineering analysis decades later. Measurement was not just recording, it was validation, communication, and preservation. The technological trajectory illustrates another pattern. Frontier innovations often emerge from necessity rather than curiosity. The 1887 drought created a crisis of storage. Conventional methods failed comprehensively. The crisis forced experimentation. Success under extreme conditions proved the innovation's value. Subsequent droughts reinforced the lesson. By the Dust Bowl era, passive underground cooling was established practice rather than experimental technique. Crisis drives innovation. Measurement validates innovation. Documentation preserves innovation. The cycle repeats across technologies and contexts. The human dimension cannot be ignored. Jacobsen's spiral represents not just technical achievement, but personal courage. Building against convention requires confidence in one's understanding. Investing triple labor on an unproven technique requires belief in the design. Facing mockery while waiting for vindication requires resilience. The technical success is matched by the personal achievement. The story honors both.